was a great day for Pinoy fans as Gilas Pilipinas started their SEA Games campaign with a dominant 45-point victory over the Malaysian Nationals. And joining us to talk about that win and the rest of the tournament is basketball analyst, our good friend, Coach Mark Molina. Welcome back to the show, Coach.
Thanks, guys.
Comfortable win, a nice tune-up match for us. No disrespect, of course, to Malaysia. But despite the training problems that we encountered and some of the controversies that were out there, this is a good start for us.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're playing an inferior opponent, that's what you want to do. And Coach Chot Reyes spread out the minutes because you're going to need guys like Brownlee, Stan Hardinger to play more minutes against the bigger teams like Cambodia and Indonesia. So I think Brownlee only played 15 minutes in that game. Nobody really played a lot. I think the kids played more. Michael Phillips, Lastimosa, Amos, and they all delivered. They all played well.
Yeah, and Brownlee probably only made his points towards the end when he started shooting.
So a lot of the younger generation of hoopers, as Coach Mark mentioned, are getting a lot of international experience. Mga nakakalaban mo pa to, Coach, sa UAAP, of course, guys like Jerome Lastimosa, Mike Phillips, Mason Amos, who has not played in the UAP but already got international experience, Coach. How important is this for their young careers moving forward also?
It is very important for the program to constantly have fresh blood into the national team and playing in a big event like the SEA Games against good opposition. And this should be a theme, and this is something that Coach Chot loves to do as well. Put in some young blood, and they show they can ball. I mean, Michael Phillips had 15 rebounds.
Very efficient too
in that game. So he shows that he can be a performer. He's a role player. But excellent motor, maybe the top defensive player in college basketball right now, and he got a chance to play. Amos, of course, you mentioned him. He has played FIBA qualifying tournaments for us, and I think he's going to be a big part of the future of Gilas because he does one thing very well, and that's shoot the basketball. He's 6'8", he shoots the ball. We don't really have, in the past few editions of Gilas, after the retirement of Ranidel de Ocampo, a consistent stretch four. Maybe that becomes Mason Amos in the future. And then, of course, you mentioned Jerome as well. And in the Philippines, we always have great point guards. And I think Jerome's headed in that direction for Gilas. He's smooth. And if you look at the lineup of Gilas right now, they have Chris Ross, they have Newsome as their veteran point guards. They're not really shooters. So I think Jerome fills in a need because he's a point guard who can shoot from the outside, who can score. I think a little bit more than Chris and the two Chris's, Ross and Newsome.
Right. Jerome always acts like he's been there before. No, he always plays like he's been there in stages like excuse me, before. Okay, now we don't want to be deceived also by that game. As you know, it's an inferior, as you mentioned, an inferior opponent. So what are we looking at, especially knowing that we're going up against the hosts and some naturalized players also, because that's going to be a completely different game.
Well, I hope we got some info on these naturalized players that they have, because of course scouting will always be a premium here, and we should know the way how these players play. But you would expect Coach Chot he will probably lean more on his veterans against Cambodia, against Indonesia. So expect CJ Perez. Of course, Justin Brownlee should be the main man. He'll probably be playing a lot of power forward in this lineup. But I think our centers are pretty strong. We have BGR, who I think is fantastic on the defensive end, high motor as well. And then you have Stan Hardinger and Phillips. I think we're very set in that regard. We can match up with anyone in terms of size and athleticism in the bigs position. But we would need shooting for sure. So we will need some contributions, of course, from Lassiter. And hopefully, Calvin Oftana will be well enough to play tomorrow. And guys like Arvin Tolentino as well. Because you need to hit the free ball in international play.
Well, individually, Coach Chot said that they know how these players play, but in terms of team play, they only have one game of film when they beat Singapore, talking about Cambodia, Coach. But let's talk about, the general landscape of the Southeast Asian region when it comes to basketball. Usually, the Philippines would usually cruise over the competition. But how has the landscape evolved throughout the years,
It's
Coach?
very different now, especially in this edition of the SEA Games.
Right.
We saw it in 3x3. Cambodia, 3 out of 4 players naturalized. And it's allowed. And this is not a FIBA tournament where
Correct.
only one naturalized player is allowed. Cambodia is going to have a handful in the 5-on-5 game. So will Indonesia. Indonesia, I think, had one in Hanoi last year when we lost to them. They will have 3
Right.
this year.
Nadagdagan pa.
Nadagdagan pa. So they will definitely be better. So it's different. Before, we could send the college kids and we can win the SEA Games
Right.
with our eyes closed, but it's different now. But I think this version of Gilas is much better than the one we had last year, specifically because we have a naturalized player this time around. We didn't have one last year. Now we have not just anybody, but it's Justin Brownlee. And then a good selection of, as I mentioned, I think I'm very comfortable with the bigs that we have here
Yeah.
because they're athletic. They can switch on ball screens. They can play zone with these guys. And even our guards are very tough on the defensive end with Chris Newsome and Chris Ross. And that's why, to me, we just need to make enough threes. To me, that could be the problem. Maybe we lack shooting. But if we can get enough threes, we should win the SEA Games.
Quickly, Coach, when you don't know your opponent, when there's not much material to work with, what do you concentrate on? What do you focus on? Obviously, it's easy to answer yourselves, but I mean, from a basketball standpoint, a coaching standpoint.
Every team has a default defensive scheme.
Right.
And for sure, Coach Shot will probably do that. I mean, the
Nakaset
rules
na yun,
in pick and rolls would be they have a default system.
Right.
And then you will see as the game goes on, you will switch. If your default is drop coverage, and then suddenly they have the very good point guard starts to shooting threes, then maybe you would go to a switching defense or something else towards the game. But I'm sure they have a default system, and usually it's a conservative one that the coaches will use if they don't know the opposition.
Correct.
And these are PBA players.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think they have the ability to adjust on the fly, during the game, during timeouts, and during the halftime situation.